so small? Why is the door so small in such a vast and immense world that the Lord has created? He has hidden in it a narrow gate, he says. Why is it so small if it is the most important thing, the narrow gate of salvation? Any other human designer, even maybe ourselves, would do the other way around. Make the most important the most significant. But thankfully we are not God, and precisely because it is the most important thing, it is that the Lord has made it the narrowest of all gates, so that nobody would pass through that gate without noticing or without even wanting to go through that gate. The gate of salvation requires intentionality. We need to intentionally and strongly look for the door of salvation. The signage pointing to that door is everywhere in the world. It is in nature, it is in books, it is in history, and there's even living signs pointing to the narrow gate. However, the invitation of the gospel today is to look at our own salvation. Because when in most matters we are personally concerned, usually, and not so much about others, in this particular one, we can be tempted to be more concerned about everyone else but ourselves. So Jesus turns the question back upon ourselves. You strive to go through that narrow gate of salvation. You go through the narrow gate of salvation. That is the invitation of Christ on this Sunday. So where can we find that narrow gate? Jesus says in John 10:9, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Jesus is the gate. And those who encounter him encounter the gate. They encounter salvation. The door is a person. And to go through it, we need to develop that personal relationship with him. There's a beautiful moment in The Lord of the Ring when the fellowship gets to the mountain of Moria, the mines of Moria, and they get to the west wall, and they need to go through the doors of Doran. And they are closed. They are closed and sealed after, so many years of the powers of evil. But the moon shines on the door, and it shows these elvish words that give a cue onto how to get through that door. And the words say, speak, friend, enter. And so Gandalf, he begins to, say all these words and all these different spells and trying to knock on the door and get through it, and he can't. Until Frodo, he realizes that that's a riddle, and he says in Elvish the word, friend. And then the gates are open, and they are able to go through it. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. It is in friendship with Christ that the doors of salvation are opened to us. That is why Jesus never said that it is complicated, but he said that it is narrow. It is not without effort. Following Christ is a decision that impacts the core of who we are. A decision that is total and radical. So it is simple, but it is hard. It is simple to get to the door, but hard to go through it. It is simple because the friend Christ has already done it all. But it is hard for us to go through that friendship and let it impact the core of who we are. So I think that the impact that salvation has in our lives is threefold. And all three, they begin with an R so that we can remember them. And the first one is, the first impact of Christ and that friendship in our lives is that it restructures our heart, the restructuring of our heart. When we enter that friendship, when we try to go through that narrow gate of the friendship with Christ, God becomes the first love. And He restructures all other loves in us that have the risk of becoming idols in us. When love does not have an order, a priority order where God is the first, we quickly fall into idolatry. Whether that's other people whom we love more than God or other material possessions, it doesn't matter. When we are lacking that order, when He is not the first, we are not able to love in a just way. And of course, the flip side of this is that there's a great freedom to love others in a very just way when we go through that narrow gate, when God really filters all of our loves. We are able to love every single person, every single possession in a just way. So that is the first impact of going through that narrow gate. It is narrow because it aims to restructure our hearts. The second impact is the removal of our sin. Christ entering our hearts begins a transformation from the old self to the new creation. And this could be a painful process because we are more attached to sins that don't belong in our lives than to the true identity that Christ brings. However, it is only when we go through the process of this removal of sin that we experience great freedom to be our truest person. And finally, the third impact is the reversal of our values. Christ restructuring our hearts, He also reorients our value system. Things that maybe are more superficial and gave value to my life, they become more insignificant and secondary when we let Him in. Our values are restored and we experience a great freedom to pursue true values, the true ones that God sets for us. So these are the three main reasons why salvation is a narrow gate. Because Christ has done it all for us on the cross. But for us to go through that gate, it implies these three things. And that's why it becomes narrow. And it takes strength, and we need to strive for it. So how to put this into practice? It is hard because this is the core gospel. This is the core of what we need to do in our lives, the most important thing. So I think that the most important thing is that we walk out of church today with a greater desire to go through that narrow gate, to truly let God work in us the 3 R's of salvation, so that we may be shaped in the likeness of the door, in the likeness of Christ, so to be able to go through it. Knowing that it's not a narrow gate that we need to make at the end of our lives, but a gate that is narrow as the personal relationship with Christ, and letting the salvation He won for us impact our lives daily. So what I want to propose to all of us so that we are able to work this week on letting Christ deeper and more closely into our hearts is to use the remembering tool of the doorway of our houses, so that every day when we go out from home into our daily lives, we might be reminded to go through the narrow gate, to go through the narrow gate of the friendship of Christ. So maybe we can hang something from the door, the knob at the door, and to remind us every time we go out during this week to strive to go through that narrow gate and work on the 3 R's of salvation. A person after last night Mass sent me a picture of their doorknob already. They hang a cross from it. So please don't send me an email with all your pictures, because that would flood my email. But do it, okay? That is the proposal for this Sunday, that we may work hard on our salvation. It is a small and narrow gate, because that's how the Lord wants to work in our hearts, so to prepare us for heaven already in this life, becoming more like Him through that friendship with Him. And to those who every day strive to go through the door of friendship, Jesus receives us here in the Eucharist.